Hey everyone, Josh Hennick here. On the phone line, I have MMA insider Dizz. You can follow him on Twitter at Talk MMA. For those who may not know, Dizz is what we would consider the underground insider. He's the guy that half the people in the media are either afraid to reference, or they steal all of his material, or they reference him and they just act like he doesn't exist. Dizz, how you doing today?
I'm good, Josh. Thanks for that introduction. That's very humbling.
I've always viewed that a lot of the stuff that you'll bring out, it just seems like people end up either stealing it or they'll reference you, but then they act like you don't exist in public. So, it's one of those things where people don't realize a lot of times, being an insider is actually the dirty job. It's really not the high-profile job that you see like an NFL insider on TV.
It's definitely got its perks, but it also has its disadvantages as well. Some people are a little skeptical to tell you some of the things they want to tell you. Other people, they kind of want to use you as their bulldog, or maybe help push a situation such as a fight or a angry situation between two fighters or whatnot. But yeah, it's it doesn't matter. It's not the job that pays me, but I'm kind of the guy sometimes, even some of the journalists who come to and don't officially. This late in the game, I've done it for 6-7 years now. I don't even beg or even attack anybody or go at somebody for not crediting me too much. It's nice, though, when you wake up with text messages one morning and, most of the major outlets that do have the respect, like Fighting Junkie or Bloody Elbow, have all referenced me, as the first, to report. It's kind of humbling at times. And, other times it's kind of like, that's all right. If somebody put it out there.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's first start with this weekend's major pay-per-view. Let's first start with the co-main event, because of the fact that the co-main event, I think, was the fight that more of the MMA fans knew about, but the casual fans kind of got drawn into because a lot of the casual fans bought the pay-per-view because of Aldo McGregor, whereas the Rockhold-Weidman fight was actually more so the fight that was more, you got the more bang for your buck.
Right, absolutely. Rockhold and Weidman, their title bout definitely was overshadowed by the big cloud that is Conor McGregor, and you can't even add Jose Aldo to that equation, because if it wasn't for Conor McGregor, this would just been another Jose Aldo, featherweight title bout. Rockhold and Weidman, God, you couldn't have asked for a better fight. It was back and forth at some point. At one point, Chris Weidman, you didn't know which way it was going to go until Chris Weidman went outside of his own comfort zone and threw a spinning back kick. I'm not sure what he was thinking there. I was kind of thinking maybe he was, it worked for Belfort. Let me see if I can do this. Just put him at a serious disadvantage.
Looking at that fight, Rockhold, he was a former Strikeforce champion. This is a guy who had been, wanting this title fight for a while. A lot of people wondered if he was ever going to get it, honestly. Not to be mean to anybody, but just the way, the landscape of that middleweight division is. And for Weidman to lose, this is a big deal, because Weidman's the guy who took down Anderson Silva. Weidman was considered the next guy. And now Rockhold comes in and basically takes the belt away from the promised one, basically.
Right. Yeah, Weidman, he's so gritty. And I'll tell you, he is indicative of the way that Ray Longo and Matt Serra and all them train. They are just gritty. They're hard work all the time. It's you never hear about a week training session out at Ray Longo's or Matt Serra's BJJ. So it's, but on the flip side, you never hear about a week training session coming from Luke Rockhold's camp either over at AKA. Guys get injured out there. So
I was just going to say, those guys are always injuring each other. So
yeah, look at Khabib Nurmagomedov. I mean, he should have fought for a title by now. And he even announced retirement, and then, he retracted and came back a little bit later and said, hey guys, I take that back. I'm not retiring, as if somebody was standing over him and kind of, sitting behind the curtain and kind of pulling the strings a little bit, I feel.
Well, it's not another here nor there. What do you think the future is right now for the UFC middleweight division now that Rockhold has the belt around his waist and Weidman has been knocked off his pedestal?
I think it's wide open. I really do. I mean, you got Yoel Romero, who's tapping on the door. That the fight between he and Jacare Souza could have went either way, which was the fight that just that came right before Weidman and Rockhold. Great build up for it. Tim Kennedy's still out there. He's just tough. That's just all there is to it. He's a grinder. Even if he wasn't a mixed martial arts fighter, he's still an Army Special Forces soldier. So he's got it from both sides of the fence here. He's a soldier and he's a fighter. So fighting's kind of his life, other than hunting Hitler. So middleweight division. I mean, I think we've now. I got to say this. I hate to say this, and I know a lot of Brazilians are going to be kicked off at me when I say this. I think we can finally say that we've probably seen Lyoto Machida's days. I think after taking a beating from Chris Weidman, taking the beating he took from Luke Rockhold, I just kind of think that we've seen Lyoto Machida now as a great journeyman, for the middleweight division.
We're talking with MMA insider Dizz. You can follow him on Twitter at TalkMMA. I mentioned Ronda Rousey earlier. She lost to Holly Holm, and the ESPN magazine article came out recently, and it was written by somebody, not an MMA reporter, someone who's covered a lot of basketball. This is an individual who is very good at her. I'm going to preface it. She's very good at her job, but she's trying to convey something from someone who is in a totally different world than she is familiar with. And the article comes off very as if Ronda is just in a very bad place and that she's not being fully rational right now. Looking ahead for Ronda Rousey, this is the first loss that she's had in MMA. They're going to give her the rematch. It looks like it's going to be at UFC 200 in July. Your thoughts on where we're going and where Ronda Rousey is going?
I think it's too soon. Maybe the Ronda Rousey hype train has ended. Maybe it hasn't. But, with the matchup with Holly Holm, I think it's evident that she has, she's been exposed, to be weak to a certain skill set. Now, I got to tell you, Holly Holm's cardio is just light years ahead of Ronda Rousey. And obviously her stand-up skills are light years ahead of Ronda Rousey. And I'm not going to make any excuses. Holly Holm did her thing, and she did it phenomenally. She fought a perfect fight. I hate to repeat what everybody else is saying, but you can't get around it. She fought the perfect fight. And Ronda gasped. She didn't look good at the weigh-in. She looked pale. She's usually her California golden skin self. She looked pale. She didn't look right. Her face didn't look right when she got into the fight. The way I viewed her when she stepped in that cage was anywhere but here. I wish I was anywhere but here right now. And I think it showed in the way she fought. She fought desperate.
Real quick, how much of that gets back to her environment? Because the comments from her mother weeks before the fight, all the rumors that are out there about her coaches, all kinds of weird stuff going on in and around her. I mean, she's been in and out of multiple relationships in the last several years. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not saying any one of these caused her to be like that, but at some point, it doesn't matter how strong and how resilient you are, you're going to crack under emotional pressure.
Right. She's human like anybody else. Of course she is. But and I feel for the girl. So I feel for the girl in that aspect, but I think, this was the first UFC event that her mother didn't attend. So, that had to be weighing on her mind as well, because her mom's been at all of her fights.
Since she was 8 years old.
Correct. And this was the only one that she wasn't at. And a lot of that had to have affected her. I mean, I'm pretty sure she probably, she was probably cussing under her breath about why her mom wasn't here. Maybe, lying to herself about, I'll be just fine. When in the back of her mind, in that little mental filing cabinet, she was upset. And anything that her boyfriend was telling her while he was there, it doesn't really help. Anything her trainer didn't really help. It's not what she knows that they're there to tell her what she wants to hear and not what she needs to hear. So probably was a bad camp. Like I said, I'm not making any excuses, but these things do happen in the sport. That's why a lot of times, as an insider, I like to get inside and find out what exactly did happen. All the casual fans, they can say whatever they want. They're there for that reason. That's their place. But when I go in and I look, I want to make sure that, so did this person just jack around during camp or what happened? Well, we know Ronda obviously films a lot of movies, and she's been in she's been in a few movies. So, I think balancing her, her Hollywood life with her personal life and then her fight life, and, having a mediocre boxing coach, I think it finally just had took its toll. She wasn't ready for this, type of striker.
Talking here with Dizz MMA Insider. You can follow him on Twitter at Talk MMA. Let's transition back to the men's game. Also this past weekend, Conor McGregor finally, I guess you could say, some people say he reached his destiny. Some other people may say that, Aldo finally met his match. Whatever explanation someone may want to give, but Aldo's reign is over. Conor McGregor is there. Let's first talk about the fact that you and I have talked about on Twitter and privately about the fact that Conor McGregor is the game changer that could really do a lot for MMA at this point.
Conor McGregor went to school and got his real estate license and just bought a whole bunch of real estate inside the heads of a bunch of fighters. And Jose Aldo, he owns the biggest chunk of land inside that man's cranium, and it absolutely showed. When is the last time you have seen Jose Aldo rush into a fight?
Never.
Rush right at it. Never. He's so calculated and cold. The man is cold and calculated in the way he fights, the way he disguises his leg kicks coming behind his punches. And everybody knows it's coming. Everybody knows these kicks are coming, these leg kicks. And guys still have to hobble back to their stools in between rounds if they make it out of the first round.
Right.
Jose Aldo rushed right at Conor McGregor, and he got his lights put out. Now, I don't know. I don't know if you peel back the skin on Conor McGregor's left hand, but I'm telling you, something bionic is happening inside that man's left hand, because anything that left hand touches it shatters.
Looking ahead for Conor McGregor, it looks like his next fight is going to be against New Jersey's own Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar beat Chad Mendes, who is pretty much the guy who was sitting around as one of the top three featherweights for the longest time and just never was able to win a belt. And Frankie Edgar is one of the few guys who was able to go the distance with Jose Aldo. What do you think of a Frankie Edgar-Conor McGregor matchup? I
love this fight. Absolutely. Yeah, I love Frankie Edgar, man. I'm telling you, he has. Everybody was talking about how much power, Chad Mendes has. He could potentially knock Edgar out. But let's think about that a little bit. He's taken some of the hardest shots from Gray Maynard, who is somebody that could knock out guys who are in there. Knock out guys at 170.
Gray Maynard, by the way, is a guy who walks around almost at 200 pounds.
I've seen him in Chicago a couple of years ago, just right before UFC on Fox 6, and I'm not a thin guy by any stretch, and he looked just short of being as heavy as me, just in better shape. The knee, there's also a knee that Ben Henderson gave to Frankie Edgar that kind of changed the course of the fight in their lightweight title fight.
Right.
But Frankie Edgar still hung in there. So the guy's taken some pretty hard shots, and then he went on a four, lost to Jose Aldo, went on a 4-fight win streak before fighting Chad Mendes, and unfortunately for Mendes, I told Ali Abdelaziz, who is Frankie Edgar's manager, told him that, so when do you expect to face Conor? And that was a week before he fought Chad Mendes. And he's like, he hasn't fought Mendes yet. And I said, you're not hearing me. So what date do you expect to face Conor? And so I was basically telling him that Frankie Edgar's going to win that fight. I just thought he was going to outpoint him. I didn't think it was going to be a 2-minute, 28-second knockout.
Do you think Frankie Edgar has the tools to go the distance with Conor McGregor, a guy who has pretty much been slaughtering people?
He's just going to have to maintain his lateral movement, and he's going to have to keep Conor McGregor off balance, which is going to be difficult because just from looking at Conor McGregor's fights and his fight with Max Holloway, Conor McGregor does a really good job of maintaining balance. I think he fought Holloway. I believe he had a damaged ligament in one of his knees in that fight. But yeah, I mean, even with the damaged ligament in his knee, he was still able to decision, Max Holloway, who also had a really good showing last Saturday night.
We're going to start wrapping this up here. Looking ahead to this Saturday, Donald Cerrone finally getting his title shot. It's going to be taking on Rafael dos Anjos, and in a fight that, a lot of people felt wanted Cerrone to fight sooner. The cards just didn't line up that way in a lightweight division that is probably one of the most loaded on the planet. Doesn't matter if you're in... What's that?
Ridiculously loaded.
So, I mean, Donald Cerrone's having to, maneuver his way through an obstacle course of insanity to finally get a title shot. This is a guy who was the WEC champion at one point, and now he's finally got his shot. A lot of people think that Cerrone is going to win this fight on Saturday. Looking ahead, do you think this is going to be Cerrone's chance to shine, or will Dos Anjos prove that he's not a flash in the pan?
I think this is Cerrone's moment, and I told another conversation that I had with Ali Abdelaziz, who is Rafael dos Anjos' manager. I told him myself. I said, I said, no offense. I said, I just think this is Donald's moment to shine. Forget the bad luck that he had on the way to Orlando with his broken down RV. I think that he's going to make up with that. I think Donald Cerrone beats him, and I think he drinks a lot of Budweiser right after that.
This is true.
Which is also a good gateway. Beating Dos Anjos is also another gateway to a payday because he exchanged words with Conor McGregor at the big press conference that they had. I forget. I don't know. They've had several different names.
They had the super press conference. I remember that. Yeah, I know you're talking about.
Yeah, they've had a couple of those. I forget the names of them. They call them anymore. But anyways, McGregor and Cerrone. And actually, Cerrone told him that Aldo was going to beat him there at that press conference, and Conor obviously laughed it off, and as well as he should have. But that's honestly, other than the fight between Frankie Edgar, I'd like to say I would love to see a Conor McGregor Donald Cerrone bout as a super fight.
Yeah, but
Pettis, that would work too.
Yeah, well, I also would love to see a lot of things too, but the reality is that just looking at MMA history, the UFC has been shied away from super fights for the longest time. Why would it change this time?
Well, probably because you're paying somebody $6 to $7 million every time he gets on the stage, and if you're going to pay somebody that kind of money, you're going to give that guy whatever he wants, especially because he's worth it. Not to mention, there's also it seems as if the price on McGregor is going to go up here shortly.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting movie offers now. He's getting more sponsorship offers.
Oh, just in the UFC. I mean, I'm not even talking about the movies. I'm talking somewhere in the neighborhood. I believe the figure that's being lubbed around is $20 million a fight.
If Cerrone wins on Saturday, which I think you and I both expect him to, outside of a Conor McGregor super fight, because McGregor still has business with Frankie Edgar and whoever else may decide to walk around at featherweight and walk into a cage with him. What do you think is the future of the lightweight division with a Donald Cerrone champion?
Well, we're looking at Anthony Pettis and Eddie Alvarez are getting ready to do a showdown, but I'm telling you, you cannot count out Tony Ferguson. He is hot right now, hot. And I think that's something I would want to capitalize on as well. I'm expecting I'm expecting to see Tony Ferguson. Man, that's gonna be tough. I'd like to see Tony Ferguson, if he's healthy. I would like to see Tony Ferguson against Khabib Nurmagomedov, and if he wins, I think if he wins, I'd like to see him in a title fight. I think the marks are set right now for Eddie Alvarez, the winner of Eddie Alvarez and Pettis, to fight Cerrone, or decide yes, whoever's champion. Then I'm already saying Cerrone is the champion, so it's kind of outcome hasn't been determined yet. But yeah, I'm just going with.
Yes, this will be recorded on Thursday, folks. If you're listening to this on Saturday, this was recorded on Thursday. Okay.
Gotta love those pre-recorded shows.
Well, But seriously though, it's really interesting looking at the lightweight division, especially a guy like Eddie Alvarez, a guy who's another local guy from down here in our region. This is the guy out of Philadelphia. Eddie Alvarez. I'm not trying to be blasé when I say this, but he ruled the Bellator lightweight division for a long time.
Oh, destroyed a UFC import in Roger Huerta. Destroyed him. I mean, that just kind of told me where he was at, with the UFC at that time. And, people don't think people are kind of, the high-end journalist, and if I say high-end, picture me putting up the finger quotes. High-end journalists like to say, they don't like to use other fighters and other fights as measuring sticks. You absolutely can. Where's that? Like, I want to see a rule book where you can't do that, because it's worked for me. It's done just fine. But when the Eddie Alvarez, I thought should have been in the UFC a couple of years ago, and I used to get emails from Bjorn Rebney, who he would ask me, "What do you think of this card this weekend?" And I was on good terms with him. Bellator's former owner and CEO, chairman, Bjorn Rebney, before he disappeared out of the scene. And, he stopped talking to me once I told him, just do the right thing and let Eddie go. Just do the right thing, man. Yeah, he just he just stopped talking to me from there. But Eddie Alvarez, I think he's making up for time, and I'd like to see him fight more often. I don't want to see these, fighting every 6 months kind of things. The best Eddie Alvarez I've ever seen was that guy who fought every few months, not less than, not more than 6 months. And I think that's always going to be the best Eddie Alvarez that you'll see. So, his fight with Michael Chandler, he lost that fight. I think it was a wake-up call to him. He come back and he destroyed Chandler. Made it to the UFC. I think Donald Cerrone was a bad first fight for him in the UFC. But yeah, I think we're seeing it now. I think we're seeing Eddie Alvarez come, a little bit more full circle now, and I think we're going to see a great fight between him and Pettis in January.
Dizz, I want to wrap up with this. You and I have talked about things off, outside of the radio land, outside of Twitter and private about different things. And obviously we can't divulge certain things, but I wanted to talk about the fact that, you mentioning Alvarez versus Cerrone fighting, it was one of those, the UFC giving the fans what they wanted, because you have one guy who's the former champion of Bellator, another guy who is a champion in WEC, two organizations that, never were able to be what the UFC is. In today's world, there is no WEC, there is no Strikeforce anymore. a lot of these organizations have been either absorbed or debunked or bought out by other people. And in today's world, there really is only two other organizations. Some people say three, but honestly, I consider ONE FC not even involved in the North American market. Realistically, in the North American market, it's World Series of Fighting and Bellator.
Right.
Where do you think the future is for organizations that don't have the label of UFC above their banner?
Well, I think that all depends on them. Really, I mean, I don't want to, to try to make this, not to try to go over your time here. I think you have to be realistic about who you are and where your position is. Stop trying to compete with the UFC. That's number one. Do not compete with the UFC. Understand who you are. Understand your role in the game. If you're a World Series of Fighting, if you're a Bellator, if you're a Titan Fighting, Legacy, Victory, any of these other organizations, understand that even though your name says World Series of Fighting, you may only be able right now at this moment to put on regional level shows. Stay that way. Build fighters. Build them up. Send them forward. The best fighters are in the UFC, so stop denying it. Stop telling yourself that. Stop calling your regional belt a world title. Oh my gosh, it drives me crazy to watch a Bellator fight and listen to, that quirky blonde from Huntington Beach to call a light heavyweight title in Bellator a world title. And I think just being realistic about where you're at is basically what you need to, make that your first goal before you push forward. With that kind of realization, you can pretty much do anything with it. You can do whatever you want. You'll build slowly, and maybe you will land that marquee name that to come to your promotion. But it's just all about realism. Be realistic. If a show now I've said this for a long time. A-level fighter plus an A-level fighter will put on an excellent fight. A B-level fighter and a B-level fighter, they will put on an excellent fight. Even a D-level fighter versus another D-level fighter will put on a fight. But if you're going to lob A-level fighters or even B-level fighters up against a D-level fighter, I don't even want to watch it. I'm not even interested in watching a 30-second knockout, at that type of show. What we saw with Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor happened in 13 seconds. It just happened that way. That doesn't mean it's going to happen that way the next time. But yeah, for most of these regional level shows, you have to really just be honest. That's pretty much where I say with that. The sport will grow as long as you stay honest with it. As long as each individual promotion identifies and stay with their true identity. I'm a regional level show. I'm going to treat it that way. Well, hey, I've got the funds to go to China. Well, I'm going to go to China. I want to build some fighters out that way. Don't be a regional level show. Have a $1.2 million spending limit for a card, and then act like you're going to go to China. I mean, I don't think that's too much to ask.
We'll be talking with Dizz, MMA Insider. You can follow him on Twitter at Talk MMA. Dizz, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. Obviously, we went a lot longer than we had planned to, but you and I, it's always an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the platform that you guys just put me on today, and shout out to any of your listeners. Sorry if I annoyed you at any point. That's just who I am. And thanks, Josh, for having me on, and be looking forward to getting some backlash. Feel free to disagree, anybody who's listening, at Talk MMA. Also, in the springtime, late spring, I will also be donning my new podcast called That One Guy's Podcast, the T1G. So be looking for that in late spring.